Hello and welcome to Foreign and Domestic. I'm your host, Ramon Mile, back from a summer break, and it was a sweet one. Very much needed, but the world never took a break, so we have a lot of news to cover. With the American withdrawal and Taliban takeover in Afghanistan being without a doubt the largest news in the week, I thought it would be good to give a brief outline of how we got to where we are now and political analysis on the current situation and what moves should be taken next. So, as you probably already know, the inception point for the war on terror was September 11th, the World Trade Center terrorist attack perpetrated by 19 Al Qaeda plane hijackers, 15 of which who were Saudis and masterminded by Osama bin Laden. Um, in the immediate aftermath of the attacks, the United States formally responded by launching the war on terror and invading Afghanistan to depose the Taliban, which had not complied with U.S. demands to expel Al Qaeda from Afghanistan and extradite their leader, Osama bin Laden. Now, 2 years later, the war on terror expands by kicking off the Iraq War under the completely false pretense of Saddam Hussein possessing weapons of mass destruction. And now we fast forward through 18 years of CIA lies, three presidencies full of omission and deception, tens of thousands of lives lost, and 2 trillion of today's dollars spent on the Afghanistan war alone. Here we are, exactly where we started. Now, Joe Biden had initially set the full troop withdrawal from Afghanistan for September 11th, the anniversary, 2021. And the Pentagon's task of removing service members and equipment out of Afghanistan is nearly complete, with the U.S. military mission slated to end by August 31st. The Taliban effectively sealed their control of Afghanistan today, pouring into the capital, Kabul, and meeting little resistance as President Ashraf Ghani fled the country. The government collapsed, and chaos and fear gripped the city, with tens of thousands of people trying to escape. Now, late in Kabul's evening, President Ghani, he actually just released a written statement on Facebook saying that he departed the country to save the capital from further bloodshed. He says, quote, "Today I was presented with a hard choice. I should stand to face the armed Taliban who wanted to enter the presidential palace, or leave the dear country that I dedicated my life to protecting the past 20 years. If I stayed, countless countrymen would have been martyred and Kabul city would have been ruined," he added, "in which case a disaster would have been brought upon this city of 5 million people." I should also mention that today President Biden increased the deployed troops to assist the evacuation of American personnel and allies from 3,000 to 5,000. Okay, so now that we have the facts on the ground established, we can get into the analysis. And most of it's just media analysis because I mean, wow, the war hawking contrarian nature of American media has been in full swing for like a week straight now. If you've turned on the news, I'm sure you've seen it. It's been wall to wall coverage. Um, Now, talking heads have been just losing their fucking minds with arguments ranging from, blaming Biden full on, claiming, oh, he should send 30,000 troops to defeat the Taliban right now. Then there's like investment logic folks saying, like, whoa, we spent $2 trillion. Are we going to throw away all this progress and leave? And then there's like, people making the moral argument that, the social progress women have achieved in Afghanistan since the American invasion will all be lost overnight, and that we should reinvade solely for those reasons. And, none of that is persuasive. It's all illogical bullshit, because no matter how much seeing what is and what may happen in that country might pull at your heartstrings, or you may feel regret that all of the American lives and taxpayer dollars were a complete waste, and walking away feels wrong, I'm here to tell you folks, it's not wrong. Yes, the plight of social reform, such as women's freedom, is real. Yes, there will inevitably be violence and reprisals and, probably beheadings and general economic instability. But I'm telling you, this is still the only real option we have. And I'll explain why. If after 20 years, the complete refurbishing of the Afghan military with planes, reconnaissance technology, special tactics training, modern equipment, and the bolstering of its ranks to more than, over 300,000 strong isn't enough to stop an immediate takeover of their country in less than a month, It was never gonna play out any different whether we pulled out 5 years after the invasion, 20 years, or 50 years later. I mean, this is a civil war, folks. An intervening country isn't going to change the sentiment of the people who are willing to fight and kill to take control of their government back from those that they have these deep ideological divides with. I mean, there's a quote right here. I heard it on Rachel Maddow was interviewing I think a freshman congressperson in the House, a Democrat, and he was in the military. He quoted it, and I found it today on the internet. There's a quote. It's an Afghan proverb, but some Western analysts have credited it to the Taliban. It's quote, "You have the watches, we have the time." And this has never been more true in the 21st century than this week. I mean, holy shit, you wanna talk about biding your time. I mean, we we just went from a slow drip, drip withdrawal over the course of, however many weeks, and boom, they launched their offensive, and we're talking like 2 weeks, folks. I mean, this is fucking fast. I mean, and it's to the point where, I've read a bunch of other analysis. I'm not going to get into it too much here today because there's a ton of speculation from, people at like US Central Command, people who do war reporting, all this other stuff and I mean, some of it makes sense where, people are speculating like, okay, so there's obviously like people on the um, inside the Afghan government assisting the Taliban here, which I'm sure, like, that goes without saying. Because there really isn't any way possible, or there's, people just literally purposefully not in military command of the Afghan government, and I've read some stuff where like, there's people who were supposed to be like holding certain cities. There were security forces in certain cities that like, they were getting like sent food rations. They got this one unit got sent like a box of slimy potatoes, and they were supposed to like eat that for a week, shit like that. And the thing is, like, if you're in a position where you're in the Afghan security forces and America's leaving, and like the Taliban are coming, and then like the week of the invasion, you get sent from your logistical support a box of slimy fucking potatoes to eat for the whole week, and you're like entrenched in a position. I mean, yeah, that's like almost on purpose. That doesn't even, you know what I mean? Like that's literally like people are just playing games. Like there really isn't any other way. I mean, I have no way to confirm this. I haven't seen, like I said, I've just read a ton of speculation, but you can probably assume that there's definitely like, turncoat fuckery type of shit going on here. So, before we keep going with this, I don't want to give the idea that it's like, oh, they just immediately rolled them. Like, no, there's a ton of desertion happening. There was probably a ton of insurgency in the military already itself. The Taliban, which is basically sort of just like an amalgamation of a bunch of independent fighter forces that all fight under that flag. I'm sure have been embedded in the government, in the Afghan military for quite some time. Especially with the context of, I forgot to mention at the open of this, that Trump signed a deal with the Taliban last April, I believe it was 2020, where it was basically like, okay, the US will pull out as long as you don't attack America or any of its allies in the region. Which, by all accounts, they didn't. They held off, and, I mean, that would be kind of dumb anyway. I mean, if you know that you're just going to roll in and, have a plan to just sweep the country, literally capture almost every capital in less than a month, why would you give neocons in America that red meat to be like, oh, they killed one of our boys, we got to go in, you know what I mean? So, hey, there's some discipline in that regard. They bided their time. And it's like that proverb I read. But I want to move on here to the defense of Joe Biden because I'm gonna give Joe Biden a ton of credit here because he has, like I just said, he's been under an insane amount of pressure from the media. And when I say the media, I'm not just talking like, Sean Hannity, Fox News, people who obviously are, he's their enemy. But, even MSNBC, CNN, they've been having on a ton of ex-military, a ton of analysts, people at think tanks and stuff that, basically are on like Lockheed Martin's fucking payroll, going on TV and just, being like, oh, this was handled poorly. They're not especially like on CNN and MSNBC, they're not attacking Biden directly, but they're definitely like mumbling and being like, "Oh, well, this is a fuck up," but they're not saying his name. I mean, the right wingers are saying his name. You know what I mean? But yeah, he's kind of out in the water alone right now. Not a ton of defense. But so yeah, so President Joe Biden, he came out on Tuesday this week and said he doesn't regret his decision to withdraw from Afghanistan. He said, quote, "Look, we spent over $1 trillion over 20 years. We trained and equipped with modern equipment over 300,000 Afghan forces," Biden told reporters at the White House. He continues, quote, "Afghan leaders have to come together. They have to fight for themselves, fight for their nation." Now, Secretary of State Antony Blinken said today that the Biden administration was in a no-win situation because President Trump signed an agreement with the Taliban last year that set a May 1st conditions-based deadline to withdraw all remaining U.S. troops from Afghanistan. Mr. Blinken also blamed the utter failure of US-backed Afghan military forces to defend their country. He said, quote, "It happened more quickly than anticipated." Um, Now, before we continue with his quote in this article, this is from the New York Times, by the way. I call bullshit on that. He's like, "Oh, it happened more quickly than anticipated." So since this surge began, this Taliban surge began, there's been a lot of, people rewinding and looking back through the history of what our intelligence services, what our military had been telling us, what they're reporting to the public across the last, the course of this 20 fucking year war. Um, and it's just like every other war of any type of, modern context in America where we were fed lies and bullshit where it was like, "Oh yeah, the Afghan military is performing so well, all this, blah, 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 blah." There's just go Google it, look into all of this. I didn't include it all here in my show notes, but there are dozens of examples of, you know, just complete false reporting happening directly from the military back to our government, not even just like them talking to the media. Where it'd be like, there's literally an article, where it's like, "Oh, they forgot to we miscalculated the number of air power that the Afghan military actually had, for like it was like over the course of years." And then like some investigative report in like 2013 broke it, and it turned out it was just like a lie for 3 years, but it was for a couple years, but it was a lie on paper that was done with the purpose of making it seem as if the Afghan military was stronger than it actually was. Because remember, folks, all those in between years that we spent in Afghanistan were training and outfitting the Afghan military to be able to, like defend itself and keep terrorist cells existing in their country at bay so America could eventually leave. Like, the quote unquote leave. Like that was never in the plans of these people, because at the same time that, all these folks attached to the military industrial complex, the people high up in our actual military, intelligence folks, that was the whole point. Like, they feed you these feel good, like, they give a couple hot quotes on MSNBC or to the, Washington Post or something. Like, "Oh yeah, look at this great job we're doing here, blah, blah, blah. But oh, it could be so much better. And, the world would be so much safer if we just had, they need, 5 more fighter jets. And if we can do a little more special tactics training, you know what I mean? It's all about money. That is that's how we stayed on this path for so long. That's why so many Americans even forgot we were in Afghanistan, because we pivoted from it being, a hot war surging. The Taliban recoiled pretty quickly in the years following the initial invasion of Afghanistan. There wasn't like it was all just guerrilla fighting, and there was a lot of quiet time in between then. You know what I mean? Like 2003 when we invaded Iraq, which became, the center, the main focus of the war on terror. And, I feel like a lot of Americans just fell asleep on Afghanistan. And it was done that way purposefully. You know what I mean? It was sort of a perfect pivot where we were all lied into the Iraq war, weapons of mass destruction, all that jazz. And at the same time, Afghanistan was a huge moneymaker where, you go read all the articles of American soldiers protecting poppy fields, being doing security and money runs for, fucking drug warlords and shit in the country, typical stuff. But I mean, for some people, it might be new and it might be shocking, but there's a lot to understand around these topics when you get into foreign policy, especially when you're talking about the Middle East. But it's I there you have to go into all of these things like when it's being reported in real time, extremely skeptical and looking at everything with sort of a crooked eye and being like, all right, well, let me see what actually backs this up. Um, but so let's continue here. I digressed hard there. So Anthony Blinken, the Secretary of State, uh, to continue his quote, he said, quote, "The fact of the matter is, had the president decided to keep forces in Afghanistan beyond May 1st, attacks would have resumed on our forces," he told CNN. "The Taliban had not been attacking our forces or NATO during the period from which the agreement was reached to May 1st. Okay, so to continue on with his analyzing that quote there, he in the first part of his quote, he said the Biden administration was put into a no-win situation because of the deal Trump signed with the Taliban last year. Okay, so how are you in a no-win situation if, according to what you just said in that quote, you're confirming that the Taliban hadn't attacked our forces from that point of that treaty all the way till May 1st? That means it worked. That means it's a good thing. What conditions would these people actually think Trump's going to get out of a guerrilla unit made up of independent fighting forces? Like, what was he going to get from them? That was all we should have gotten, because that was the whole point was, hey, we're going to be here and help, like, they're the whole, oh, we're nation building while we're finishing up our quote unquote nation building. Just don't attack any Americans and everything's cool. They did that. That should have been the only thing. Like, what else, Anthony Blinken? Like, what other condition do you think would have even been agreed to? Or, like, from our perspective, ideally, would you have even wanted? You know what I mean? What, like, you guys have to form a democracy and there have to be elections? They would have never accepted that. Who I listen, I get it. Everybody wants to blame whichever president was in control of this shit. Whenever it goes bad. And Biden's taking a lot of that heat right now. But in that same fashion, like, no, I don't agree with what Anthony Blinken's quote here, where he's like, "Oh, I'm blaming Trump." Where, hey, you know what? I give Trump credit because at least he fucking was planning to get out, man. You know what I mean? His whole party, he took heat for that shit from a lot of neocons and establishment Republicans. He went against the grain in his own party for that. Anytime a Republican does that, I'm going to give him credit. I'm going to give him the carrot because that's a good thing. I don't give a fuck about conditions. You need to leave the country. That's it. It was game, set, match over a decade ago, bro. Like, it doesn't even, what more, Anthony Blinken? Like, what else do you think could have been squeezed from that stone? Like, I don't understand it. And it's honestly, it's insulting to our intelligence that it's like, these politicians will go in the media and like have these quotes on either side and be like, "Oh, I blame Biden. Oh, I blame Trump." No, it's ridiculous because largely, a lot of what happened at the inception of all this was, George Bush's dumbass getting lied to by, the our security services and intelligence and shit like that. You know what I mean? Like, who are the people that are really to blame for all this? But that put us in an impossible situation where you couldn't pull out, as much as these people talk about, oh, you got to save face on the world stage, blah, blah, blah. Okay, well, once you're in Afghanistan, once you're in Iraq under these, dubious pretenses. I mean, the invasion of Afghanistan was supposed to be, because Al-Qaeda was, harboring the terrorists from 9/11. But like, okay, so once they went gone in the wind and we knew years later that like they were like in Pakistan, they weren't even in the country. You stayed. And why did you stay? Because you rolled a bunch of our boys in and they kept getting fucking killed. So then it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy at that point. And that's why, like I just said, no, Trump deserves a ton of credit for that treaty because he was immediately putting us in a position. Now, granted, he didn't do it. He didn't actually do the pullout as quickly as I would have liked, but at least he signed a treaty and it sort of forced Biden's hand here. And, that's actually something I didn't think of when I was writing down the analysis of all this. Biden's hand was somewhat forced, but honestly, seeing how adamant he's being in the media with these quotes and everything, like, no, I think this is honestly something that he was like, no, fuck that. I'm getting out. I don't care what anyone says. And I give him a ton of credit for that. To continue just to finish up that Anthony Blinken quote, he says, quote, "The offensive you're seeing across the country now to take these provincial capitals would have commenced and we would have been back at war with the Taliban. I would have probably be on this program today explaining why we were sending tens of thousands of Americans back into Afghanistan and back to war, something the American people simply don't want." So yeah, again, why are you criticizing Trump then? Because he set you up as an administration, you coming in, you know, for your pullout. And that's actually, he gave you an excuse. Like he signed a deal. So again, like it's sort of weird that, like, that's gonna slide by the, politically inept media consumer. But really it's like, well, you should be like, I get it. You don't want to give credit to the guy because you're mortal fucking enemies or whatever. You cannot speak well of the previous administration when you're coming in. But at the very least, like, come on, stop gaslighting us. Don't gaslight us. Like, just don't say Trump. You know what I mean? Like, just, you don't have to give him credit, but Jesus Christ, like, you're at the same time you're saying like, oh, he fucked up and shouldn't have did that. But then it's like, okay, but we had to pull out. So what was supposed to happen? We were supposed to just trust and believe that, oh, there's a Democrat coming in, he'll pull out of Afghanistan. Oh, watch, he'll do it. Obama had fucking chances. He didn't do it. You know what I mean? Like, so no, fuck that. Give Trump credit. I'm sick of this shit. That's bullshit. There's very few things the man deserves credit for, and that's certainly one of them. Now Biden hasn't received much vocal support directly from congressional Democrats on this withdrawal, probably due to political calculation. Most Democrats who've commented in the media mostly speak on the evacuation efforts and bemoaning the trajectory of social reforms in Afghanistan. But this is completely the wrong play, folks. Republicans are in unified voice dunking on Biden's withdrawal every chance they get in the media. Mitch McConnell's comparing it to the fall of Saigon. Other people are bringing up Benghazi. This isn't Benghazi. This isn't Saigon. This was a complete and utter long-term failure that never had an Ice Cube's chance of hell of turning out any differently. And Democrats should be circling the fucking wagons for Biden on this. Because A, it's strategically the correct thing for people to the left of Joe Biden to give him credit for following through on an anti-war promise. And B, because the midterms are coming. And half of these congressional Democrats are running under Biden's wing rather than, a progressive agenda or, putting front and forward, a lot of this stuff Bernie's been championing. Look at the Nina Turner race, perfect example. There's been special elections. There's a way that people are positioning themselves for the midterms where, you see Democratic strategists talking about it openly in the media where they're like, oh, well, we're just going to run on Biden, just Biden. We support Biden because that's safe. A lot of them are in districts that he won overwhelmingly. But it's like, okay, so if that's your strategy right now, you should be immediately circling the wagons on something that he's right on, first of all. And second off, again, your political future is tied to his right now. Like, you need to take every opportunity you can to big him up if that's what you're going to do. If you're not going to be like, oh, hey, I'm an actual progressive. You just want to hide behind the president. Then what are you doing? It just doesn't make any sense. But, I've had plenty of criticism for Biden these last few months on this show, but this is the biggest thing I'll give him credit for, because honestly, for the long-term outlook of the Overton window on foreign policy, this is more important than any of the legislation that he's suggested or that has passed this year. For a guy who was a complete war hawk, for the guy who wrote the crime bill, not caving to pressure when the entire media has been dogpiling him for a week on pulling out of Afghanistan. I mean, it's great. This is a good thing. I'd like to see, I'm sure that it's possible I missed stuff, but I'd like to see more of the progressive caucus, speaking up. I mean, like, no, fuck that. Joe did the right thing. You know what I mean? Back him. Show him that you can support him when he does the things that are correct on foreign policy, that are correct for what's going to make your ideological wing of the party more popular. Let these fucking waffling centrists and shit visibly be seen to be breaking with Biden on this, or at the very least, not saying anything. You know what I mean? 'Cause who knows? Like, he might remember that. You know what I mean? Not saying I wouldn't count on Joe Biden and being an ally to, the progressive caucus, but, you know, take the chances when you can, because the thing is, at the end of the day, it costs those centrists some they have to decide. They don't know where this is gonna fall in the end. Who knows? Like, the fucking embassy could be, like, overrun tomorrow and a bunch of American diplomats killed. That's why they're not saying anything. But no, like you being a leftist in the Democratic Party, like, no, you have nothing to lose here because the president's doing something that fits your agenda. Something that, every lefty should be talking anti-war. Hey, let's get the fuck out of the Middle East with every chance they get whenever these topics come up. And then when the president does it, you flank him. You'd be like, yeah, oh shit, okay, yep, I support this. I support this. And you push that window further left, man. And the thing is, at the end of the day, the American people have been tired of this shit. So this isn't even like these centrist Democrats who are like calculating and being like, oh, rubbing their hands together, like, oh, I'm worried because something might happen, but I don't want to support him, but I'm running under him. Like, that's again, don't 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 worry on issues that A, you're right on, and B, you have the support of the American public.